Welcome, everybody, to Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. Today, we're going to be talking to Congressman Khanna. And when I say talking, I mean partly talking and maybe debating a little bit. A little un poquito.
We got to get into it a
debate.
little bit with them.
Yeah, no, but I'm looking forward to it. It should be fun. But before we even jump into it, of course, shameless plug time, everybody. Do me a big favor. Shoot on over to Substack. Link is in the video description box below. And make sure you sign up. If you pay $5 a month to get the video of every interview and you get it a day early. You know, you're going to want to see this one, so definitely do that. And for everybody else, you can still go to Substack and sign up for free, and you get the audio version of every interview, and you get it a day later, usually on Saturdays. Remember, we don't talk to any advertisers ever. We build it through small dollar donations, so we truly appreciate any help you guys could give. Now, having said that, there's a story regarding Ilhan Omar that just dropped that I thought was very interesting. Tell everybody about that.
Yeah, so this is kind of fascinating. So the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, he is coming over to give an address to a joint session of Congress. And she has said, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has said, there is no way in hell that she will attend that address next week. She announced this in a statement on Twitter. She criticized the Israeli president over the country's human rights violations and for representing, quote, the most right-wing government in Israel's history, which is just factually accurate. She also accused Israel's government of essentially putting a nail in the coffin of peace and a two-state solution with Palestine. I would say that is also factually accurate. I sort of forgot that this isn't the first time she's boycotted an address. She also boycotted Modi's address to Congress recently. So she is sort of planting a flag saying, listen, this country has way too many problems, way too many human rights abuses. They won't even let me in the country. So hell no, I am not going to this address.
So do you like it?
Yes, I do. I mean, I just think at this point, the piece to me about the idea of a two-state solution, this is a farce. I mean, they don't even pretend in Israel anymore that this is a feasible possibility. They just keep on building out illegal settlements. And the Biden administration, they'll put out some like incredibly mild veiled criticism, but they're not planning on doing anything to change the situation. So, it's the very least that you can do in terms of an act of protest to say, I'm not going to stand by and listen to this individual.
Yeah, and the reality is, in the U.S. political establishment, our top allies get sucked off. Israel gets sucked off relentlessly.
Mm-hmm.
India gets sucked off relentlessly. Saudi Arabia gets sucked off relentlessly. There's a little bit of a deviation on that in the media front, which is good. But even like CNN, remember when they had like a deal with Dubai where they would write these fawning articles over Dubai, and it's like, this is not what you're supposed to be doing, journalists. This is not journalism. Basically, pay to play stuff for, promoting Dubai. But given that those are the facts, and given all the human rights abuses over Israel in India, Saudi Arabia, I think like standing up in a hotbed of support of these countries and saying, no, this is wrong, and they're doing all these human rights abuses, I think it's correct morally, and I also think it's kind of brave. Because, as outsiders, people could look at that and say, of course we know Israel's human rights record is terrible. They basically do apartheid, illegal occupation, violating international law. Of course.
Yeah.
But in that area, in Washington, D.C., in the belly of the beast, in the swamp, if you say that, what do? They castigate you and call you an anti-Semite immediately. That's what they did with Ilhan Omar.
Yes.
What did they? She said it's all about the Benjamins, talking about the Israel lobby, AIPAC.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know why I said that? Because it is all about the Benjamins with every lobbying group. She would have said that about Saudi Arabia, and nobody would have called her an Islamophobe, right? So they called her an anti-Semite over that. It's bogus. It's total bullshit. And so she's standing up and fighting on human rights grounds. She references Rashida Tlaib, a congresswoman who literally can't go see her grandma because of how oppressive and restrictive the Israeli government is. So I think it's definitely the right thing to do. I will add, though, on top of this, that I've been thinking a lot about foreign policy lately, and I think the best approach is sort of like neutrality and necessary connections for trade and things like that. You know what I mean? And that sort of goes across the board. We have countries that we love, and we turn a blind eye to all their human rights abuses. And then there's countries that we hate, like Iran, North Korea, and we play up all of their human rights abuse. Oh, this is terrible. Somebody needs to do something about this. And we play the role of world policeman.
Right.
And I would much rather have a neutral approach on foreign policy where we need to have trade relationships. You maintain the trade relationships. But it's almost like a dog, It's your business. It's almost like a realpolitik, pragmatic approach on foreign policy, but from a left-wing, non-interventionist perspective. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So in the context of Israel, what you're saying is like we shouldn't go in and do like a regime change of the Netanyahu government. But what we should do is, why do we give them so much military aid? Like that
Cut
would
off the
be
military aid,
more.
cut off the funding, exactly. But if you have a trade relationship that's somewhat necessary in order for the world to keep functioning, it's like, okay, what are you going to do? But it's more neutrality.
Yeah, I see that point. I don't have to think through it a little bit more because
It's a complex issue.
right. I mean, that the idealist in me wants to believe in the possibility of some sort of like human rights based, international rule based order where people who are good citizens and, countries that are good citizens are able to get more access to trade or, the benefits of allyship or whatever. And others are, not that we're going to like regime change them, but there's less benefits to come from that because it's hard for me to wrap my head around how you really truly have sort of neutrality with all countries because you're going to have countries that are your allies, that you're sharing intelligence with, that you have certain trade ties with, et cetera. So for me, it's a little bit more complex to think through than that. But certain with Israel, we've just
I
given
agree, by
them.
the way. That's just a benchmark, and then you have to react accordingly based on new information.
Yeah.
And who's super extremely bad versus who's good, et cetera. Anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, with Israel, we just cover for them. We let anything go.
The worst.
And it's just
the worst.
It's just so with them, with the Saudis. I mean, it's just so brazenly obvious that all of our talk about like human rights and democracy is total bullshit. You can't have a real democracy that's an ethno state. I mean, it's just like to me cut and dry.
It's literally like definitionally you cannot have a democracy that's an ethno state.
Yeah.
You're reminding me of there was a Washington Post guy on Fox News the other day. I covered this on my show, and he made an outright defense of dictatorships.
What?
In like talking about Saudi Arabia basically buying the PGA Tour and professional golf.
Yeah.
And he made an affirmative case for like, hey, you need dictators. What are you gonna do? And it's like, this is the mindset, right? If it's our ally, you can get away, whatever the hell you want to get away with is totally fine. If it's an enemy, they would use the fact that we're talking about a dictator or a theocracy or whatever, and they'd be like, oh, somebody take action now. This is, our moral conscience can't take this. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
So it's all so haphazard. Okay, so I also wanted to show you this video, Krystal. Now, when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was on your show, this was a talking point that he put out there. Basically that he thinks the free market is the solution to pollution and climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Which you might, Kyle, you're straw man. Come on. Wrong. I'm not. So let me play you this video and then we'll react to it.
I agree 100% with you that this crisis is being used as a pretext for clamping down totalitarian controls the same way that the COVID crisis was. And it's the same people, it's intelligence agencies, it's the World Economic Forum, it's the Billionaires Boys Club at Davos, and it's the same kind of cabal of people who will use every crisis to stratify society toward, greater power for the super rich and greater power for the military, greater power for the intelligence apparatus, and less power for everybody else. A war on carbon is not going to solve the problem. If we don't have a habitat left at the end, my approach to energy is using free markets and not top-down control. We can recover what we had, but we just have to stay out of fear because that is the weapon of tyrants. If you like this video and you want to help me become president of the United States, go to Kennedy24.com and donate now.
Now, I just want to add for you also, so he tweeted this video out to like brag about it and show it.
Yeah.
And he also said the following: climate change is being used to control us through fear. Freedom and free markets are a much better way to stop pollution. Wow. Polluters make themselves rich by making the public pay for the damage they do. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market. Okay, I'll let you take your stab at this first. Obviously, I have a lot to say about it.
There's so much here that drives me crazy. First of all, one of my big irritations is this right-wing conspiracy that the World Economic Forum wants to do anything about climate change. I mean,
they want to do nothing. They want to keep the status quo is what they want to do.
The Billionaires Boys Club is very devoted to maintaining the status quo.
Correct.
This gets into like the whole ESG debate, which is for people who, haven't drank deeply of these waters. It stands for environmental, social governance. And the whole critique from like Vivek Ramaswamy and these other people is how dare these companies support any values other than just the bottom line, as if these companies actually care about doing anything other than virtue signaling on climate change. It's 100% greenwashing. There's tons of research and studies that show the companies that embraced ESG are actually worse on these goals. So that's one piece, is like this idea that the Davos set gives a single solitary fuck about climate change is ridiculous and completely like anti-factual. So that's number one. Number two, this idea of like, okay, control and totalitarianism, and they're using a crisis to control us. And you shouldn't be afraid. It's like, well, tell that to the people who just had their homes swept away in New England. What they shouldn't be afraid of, the people who are having their, their lives threatened by unbelievable hurricanes, or, facing drought and 120 degrees in the Southwest. It is a legitimate crisis. We need to take action. There is a democracy failure because the public actually wants to take action, and our politicians, who are bought off by the Davos set, don't want to because they like the status quo.
And
so,
just to cut you off for a second,
yeah.
Is any government action to address climate change a totalitarian overreach by definition? So any government action
it
falls
seems
in
like
this? That's what it sounds like, right? That's what it sounds like he's saying.
It certainly seems like it. So, I just don't even... this goes back to some of the like right-wing freakouts over like gas stoves or whatever, and it's like, oh, totalitarian, it starts with this. Even the RFK leans very much into the COVID lockdowns and the things that happened there. And the fear mongering from the right about that was like, oh, we're going to go into endless lockdown and that's going to be it. Like, obviously that didn't happen, right? And so anyway,
I remember when people were saying Biden's going to bring back the lockdowns.
Right.
It was like he never even considered it.
No, exactly.
Right.
So much of this just drives me crazy. And then finally, using free markets to deal with climate change. And this was the same thing that he told us on the show. I asked him, do you see climate change as an existential threat? And he said, yes, but I'm not going to talk about it on the campaign trail because I think it's divisive, basically. And then we should use free markets to solve. No, this is the exact definition of a problem that free markets are not going to solve. Why? Because you have a societal goal here of not going down the path of continued climate hellscape that is at odds with the profit-making motive for lots of companies that are very, very powerful. So this is like the definition of a problem that the free market is never going to solve.
Okay, I'm going to say what I said the first time I covered a similar comment he made here. He literally doesn't know what externalities are. He does not know what an economic externality is. It's like an unintended consequence of a capitalist system or a free market. So the classic example people talk about is, remember there was that company by the Hudson River, this is way back, 50, 60, 70, something like that. And they were polluting the Hudson River because it was cheaper for them to just dump their toxic waste into the Hudson River. And that's what you call an externality. And so that's what the free market gave us, them doing that. It took the government stepping in after new regulation to say, you're not allowed to dispose of that like that.
Right.
You need to spend the extra money to dispose of this in a way that's safe, that's not going to fucking poison people. Is he unaware of that? Because he keeps bringing up pollution and climate change that, like, well, the free market's going to fix it. Like, that is, nothing could be further from the truth. The free market is the problem.
Well, so if I was to steelman his position, because he says this thing about like, you show me a polluter and I'll show you someone who's imposing costs that they're not paying for or something like that. I could see where maybe what he's talking about there is like externalities and we need to price that into the system and that would reflect a true free market. Read to me the tweet that he says. He says this thing about like, you show me a polluter and...
Freedom and free markets are a much better way to stop pollution. And then he says, polluters make themselves rich by making the public pay for the damage they do. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market. No, this is what the free market gets you.
Right.
The free market gets you the really rich fat cat who buys the politician who lets them get away with their shit.
Correct. But even if you were to like really charitably try to read that of like he's actually talking about externalities and that needs to be borne, those costs need to be borne by the company, then it's like, okay, then you would support like a cap and trade system. Like that was the free market attempt to, all right, we'll price in carbon, that'll discipline, but he doesn't, I mean, he hasn't at least come out with any sort of like, we're going to do carbon pricing, we're going to do cap and trade. That's my definition of a free market.
And I would argue cap and trade isn't really free market. Free market is laissez-faire, unfettered, hands-off capitalism. That's what it is. And when you have that, this is why when we had this during the Industrial Revolution, there were tenement houses, there was child labor, there was extreme pollution. Like this is the result of that system. You can't just redefine it and say now free market means not that. No, that's what it means.
Well, this is the evolution of climate denialism on the right, which is, okay, the science is too and people are just experiencing the impact of climate change so directly in their lives all the time with extreme weather that we can't really deny that it's like, we can't really say it's not real anymore. So instead, we're going to throw up all sorts of objections just to doing anything about it. Whether it's the World Economic Forum conspiracy, which again, the conspiracy of the World Economic Forum, as we've said 100 times, it's all out in the open.
It's
the conspiracy
a status quo
is
protection racket. That's what it is.
And they want to make money. And guess what? Like undercutting the oil and gas industry is not good for them. Requiring them to green their operation, reduce carbon footprint, whatever. That is not good for their bottom line. So they have no interest in any of that. But yeah, I mean, the new mode is we're going to acknowledge that climate change is real because we look too stupid if we don't do that. But then we're going to come up with all sorts of reasons why we can't actually do anything about it or why we shouldn't do anything about it. And it seems to me like he fits perfectly on that new mode of what is effectively has the same impact ultimately of climate denialism.
Final points on this. He says a war on carbon is not going to solve the problem. I would say almost definitionally, yes.
Yeah, well.
that is exactly what you have to do. Now, you might not like that. It might feel, oh my God, this is big change. So it feels kind of scary to do this. We've never fully transitioned to solar and wind and geothermal and nuclear. So it seems like a big endeavor. It is a big endeavor. But you need to actually get off of carbon if you want to be serious about fighting back against climate change. And then the final thing is, he says, fear is the weapon of tyrants. The reason why I hate comments like, first of all, it sounds like some shit you hear on a fucking fortune cookie. Second of all, is it never the right response to be fearful?
Right.
What about World War II? What about when Hitler started taking shit over in Europe? Were we allowed to, was the government allowed, was FDR allowed to be like, hey man, we need to start mobilizing, we need to start doing something, or would somebody, chime in and say, fear is the weapon of tyrants, so you're wrong by definition. It's like, I hate this fortune cookie platitude bullshit. Like, you can't govern that way.
Yeah.
And he didn't think through these things in any serious way. It's this weird thing where he's trying to appease the right while still holding on to his environmentalist bona fides.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what it's very bizarre.
That's exactly what it feels like. No, I mean, that's my point about is the person who just had their home swept away and were terrified for their lives by these floodwaters in New England, is it okay for them to be a little bit afraid about that? We should be afraid of what's happening to the planet. We should be afraid of the way that these crises are going to impact us. And we should use that fear to spur some action to actually deal with the problem that the free market is not going to take care of.
I think they just need more free market, Krystal. So get your head right.
He needs to run for, I don't know what, I mean, his ideology is
It's all over the place. It's
scattered. Yes.
All right. So we had to discuss this. I was astonished by this, and I don't expect much of Mike Pence. But Mike Pence came out and said he supports banning abortion even for non-viable pregnancies. So in other words, if it looks like, there's a fatal defect in the fetus or whatever, it's still well, you got to give it a shot. This is his position. So I want to read you this in CNN. Former Vice President Mike Pence said abortion should be banned when pregnancy is not viable, according to the Associated Press. Quote, I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it, Pence told the AP in a recent interview. I just have heard so many stories over the years of courageous women and families who were told that their unborn child would not go to term or would not survive, and then they had a healthy pregnancy and a healthy delivery.
Wow.
Yeah. So look, I don't know what the statistics are. If I had to guess, I would say that in the overwhelming majority of cases, if a doctor tells you this fetus is not viable, the fetus isn't viable, And so effectively what he would be doing is forcing many women to have a stillbirth.
It's literally, it's monstrous.
That's got to be incredibly
Monstrous.
traumatizing, right? Like super traumatizing.
I can't imagine. You go through all of this, you carry a baby to term, knowing it's, I mean, you're advocating for torture of these women. I mean, literally, I don't know how else you describe a situation like that. And so it's unbelievable to me. And then I saw some headlines that, other Republicans are getting asked about it and they're just like dodging the question. I mean, this should be a gimme that this is just monstrous and way out of, I mean, if you hold this position, what do you think?
98%
For all
yeah.
the controversy, defund the police, and it's such a bad slogan, it's so bad for Democrats, whatever. Like, what do you say about this shit that like 0.1% of the population would be cool with and is just actively torturing women? Pence has clearly decided that his lane in the primary is to be the furthest right, especially on abortion, but on like sort of traditionally cultural conservative issues. He's looking at Iowa, which has a big evangelical population and they're well organized, whatever. And, and this is where his politics have always been. But this is particularly grotesque.
I don't understand why people feel the need to like have this purity race and this like, I'm gonna take the maximalist position race. It's really weird, especially when you talk about the issue of abortion. So like, I watched a debate the other day where somebody was arguing literally the moment of conception is from then on, it's a wrap. It should be illegal for you to do anything. And it's like that opens up so many questions. It's like, so okay, if they take the morning after pill or take the abortion pill within the first couple weeks or whatever, would you consider that murder? Is that what you would do?
Yeah, they
right?
would.
If we're talking about a gamete or a zygote or a pregestation fetus, if we're talking, as Bill Maher crudely would say in a joke back in the day, we're talking about a pile of goo, and you're willing to say that that's, this needs the full protection of the law, that you're very close to saying if somebody jacks off into a tissue and has their jizz there, that like you just committed murder to 17 trillion things because you got 17 trillion sperm in there, right?
Yeah.
This is a gross conversation.
Well, they would never control men in that way.
Right, but you get the point, right?
Yes.
It's like, what is with this? Because I think any reasonable person, when talking about the issue of abortion, you have to think it through seriously. And if you think it through seriously, I think you could dismiss the position pretty quickly that like the moment of conception is when there's a third person in the room. And then look, on the flip side, I don't agree with the idea of like right up to 9 months, right up to that line, like a day before the baby's going to be born, you can shove scissors into the back of his head. No, there's obviously a different moral calculation then versus the beginning. So where I end up is actually where the overwhelming majority of the country ends up and where almost all Democrats are, which is Roe versus Wade. I think it was phenomenal. It was a phenomenal idea. It was actually a very moderate approach to abortion. What it said is first trimester, it's a right. Women can decide, end of conversation. Second trimester, it's mostly a right, but there's, some health regulations that can be put into place. Third trimester, if states so choose, they can ban like late-term abortion. That's where it was, and I think that was a reasonable line. And, smarter people than me have the conversation all the time. What is the actual line? Is it, fetal heartbeat? Is it consciousness being developed? Is it viability of the fetus where it can survive on its own? Is it pain? Like, where's the line? Like, it's a very actually interesting philosophical and moral and ethical conversation.
Yeah.
But where we end up is with people like Mike Pence saying, I'm going to force you to have a stillbirth. Like, really? This is how off in the wilderness we are? And you got these Republican states trying to ban it from 6 weeks? A lot of people don't even know they're fucking pregnant at 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And this is where we are? That's psychotic stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And, it's stuff like this that we're about to talk to Congressman Khanna about Joe Biden and what he might do in a second term and whatever. It's stuff like this that makes it so Biden could just be like, I won't do that. You know, like I'm not gonna bring Roe versus Wade back. I'm not gonna codify rights to an abortion. I'm not gonna get rid of the filibuster to do any of that. But I just am not gonna do that crazy ass shit that Mike Pence says that he is dedicated to, and a lot of other Republicans have very extreme positions. I'm just not gonna do that. And for a lot of people, I'll be like, well, that's good enough, I guess.
And if Mike Pence thinks this is gonna help me, even in the primary, wrong. You got another thing coming. If he thinks it's going to help me in a general,
I mean,
you got another thing coming.
I think it might help him get from 6% to 8% in a primary.
You think so? That's funny. I don't even think that.
Yeah, I do, because I mean, there is a small part of the GOP base that is very well organized, that is very committed on this issue, and that has broken with Trump on, him trying to moderate some of the language. So, yeah, I think it could get him, from 6 to 8% if he stakes out the position of like, I'm the biggest psycho on abortion.
Yeah, it's fine.
That's about it.
I just respectfully disagree. I think you make a good point. I just disagree. I think that these people, first of all, Trump is the vibes guy, and a lot of these people just go based off vibes, even though they act like they don't. That's the first point. Second point is, if you want somebody who's more anti-abortion, who's actually more viable, you go DeSantis, who's at 23% instead of 6%.
Yeah.
You know, so I just feel like he's trying, but this, I don't think it's going to work at all.
DeSantis is less viable every day. So
I mean, he's been going down, but Mike Pence, really, he's human oatmeal. You think Mike Pence is more viable than Ron DeSantis?
No, but I mean, I don't think any of them are viable at this point.
I
but
kind of agree with you. I mean, unless Trump is literally behind bars, and even then, it's a coin flip.
Yeah, the Murdochs are now like
I covered that.
abandoning.
I talked about that.
They're abandoning shit. They're like, maybe Tim Scott.
Okay, but I have to ask you this now because so my first thought when I saw that is, oh my God, are they going to do the 2016 thing all over again? Where they were like, we're going to go Jeb Bush, and then it was like, okay, he didn't work. We're going to go Marco Rubio. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try Kasich for 2.5 seconds. That doesn't work. Fine, Ted Cruz, and that didn't work either. Are they going to do the same thing? Are they going to now jump from DeSantis to Nikki Haley to Tim Scott to Mike Pence, and they're going to, because that is not going to work. The only person who had any chance was Ron DeSantis, and it needed to be one-on-one versus Trump, and you need a unified conservative media apparatus to hammer away being pro-DeSantis and anti-Trump, and that obviously didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, but no, that's what they're going to do. I mean, at least the reporting is like now they're taking a hard look at Tim Scott.
Oh!
Yeah, but then also you'll like this one. It says in there that Rupert Murdoch would still like Glenn Youngkin to get him married. Real Trump slayers there. I mean, listen, with DeSantis, I just don't think he ever had the it factor to be able to knock off the king, which is Trump. You know, I don't know that I don't know who would have been the right person to rally behind,
it's
but
vibes, man.
It's clear to me that at this point that he was never that right person, even if they did all those right things from the beginning.
Trump is such a showman, and he's so charismatic, and he's kind of funny.
He's hilarious.
And like his aura just fills the room, whether you like him or dislike him, right? And like, I'll give DeSantis that I just think he's better numbers-wise than all the other Republicans. I mean, however bad DeSantis is, and people make fun of him for being an introvert and being kind of awkward, all that is true.
Yeah.
But the other guys are worse. Every other candidate is worse, except maybe Vivek Ramaswamy, but he's got weird, arrogant vibes that don't land. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Vivek, agreed. I mean, I actually think in terms of talent, I think Chris Christie is the most talented.
Oh, I forgot about Christie. Yeah, no, I agree. He is better. He's above
the most
DeSantis
talented
in terms of talking.
But he's so at odds with the GOP base that one was never going to work out. But, I mean, I don't see anyone else who, on just like a sheer political talent, putting ideology aside, really has what it takes that they could have rallied around.
But to your point, like, I literally don't think anybody has it.
Doug Burgum?
Burgumentum, baby. He said if you donate $1 to his campaign, he'll give you $20. So we're now doing like Ponzi schemes as we're running for president.
Yes, the Burgum Bros are doing Ponzi schemes.
Oh my God.
I love it. We were trying to interview, over on Breaking Points, we're trying to interview all of these people. We have like Asa Hutchinson.
I hear you're going to talk to Ada.
Yeah.
Who we call Ada for certain reasons. That's what Trump said. I still don't know why he did that.
For certain reasons.
He was talking about Asa Hutchinson. He goes, we don't call him Asa. We call him Ada.
I actually want to get him to react to that clip.
Oh, yes.
And see what he says.
Oh, my God.
Because, I mean, the whole point of Trump is like, these people are not even at 1%. Why are they even running? Which is a fair question to put to him. And so I'm thinking we get him to respond to that clip.
Here's going to be Asa's response. Sir, my name is Asa, not Ada. Just wanted to fact check you on that, please.
I appreciate him coming in. We'll see how he does and what he has to say. Take it at face value.
Listen, I'm a Burgum stan.
I really want to interview him. We put in a request for him. We put in a request for Chris. I really want to talk to Chris Christie. Our 15-year-old is now weirdly like become a Chris Christie fan.
Christie's a very good communicator. She says
he's a body positivity king.
I forgot I wanted to cover a Christie clip with you. It was the one where he's talking to Piers Morgan about trans stuff. And it's super interesting because he goes from like, he like lists off 2 or 3 very conservative positions he has on trans issues. But then randomly on the 4th one, he has like a super lefty position on it. It was amazing. It was like, a biological man is somebody born a biological man, and that's the end of the conversation. A biological woman is somebody born a biological woman, and that's the end of the conversation. That's how I view it.
Yeah.
And then Piers Morgan was like, okay, well, what if it's like an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, and they're on like hormones or what's the other one? Puberty blockers. And Christy was like, well, that's totally up to the parents and the individual. I was like,
yeah.
Wait, what? I thought you were going to hit him with the hard right thing again.
Well, yeah, I haven't seen that interview. I saw him talking about these issues in maybe a PBS interview. I don't know. Ella, our daughter, sends me all this stuff now about Christy.
Christy fan club. That's
so
amazing.
Funny. Yeah, it's like half ironic, but anyway, whatever. But it seems like he's trying to do what some, like Joe Biden does on abortion, which is saying, I personally think this is wrong. Personally, in my family, like we wouldn't get an abortion, but I don't think it should be up to the state. I think it should be up to the individual families. It seems to me like that's the line he's trying to walk.
Yeah,
on
but like
trans issues.
It seemed to me, based on what he said, that he wouldn't even call a trans person by their preferred pronouns, which to me is like the easiest thing. Even a lot of hardcore conservatives will be
I just feel like
I'll call you
that's so
whatever you want to call you.
dickish.
What's that?
I feel it's so dickish.
Well, I'll tell
to
you
be
why.
like that.
Well, he answered like that because the way it was like presented to him was like, he went to that corner of a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and that's how I view it. And it may have been related to a sports conversation too, where he was like,
Piers
I'm
Morgan's
not going to
big
allow
on that sports shit.
Piers Morgan will not. He is such a fucking wave rider, that guy, man. Whatever issue's hot, he's like, I need to surf the wave. I need to surf the wave. And he just fucking virtue signals all day to his audience. Anyway, that was sort of randomly bitter and out of nowhere. But Chris Christie, it was very interesting. The like 2 or 3 right-wing positions, then hit him with the left-wing position. And Piers pushed him on it too. Like, seriously, a 10-year-old, like puberty blockers, hormones. And he was like, listen, I'm against big government. It's none of the business of the government to get involved in that situation. We talk about parents' rights when it comes to schools. I believe in parents' rights when it comes to schools. I also believe in it for stuff like this.
That's consistent.
Yeah. So anyway, interesting guy.
Yeah, very much so. Anyway, we have another politician we want to talk to this morning, Congressman Khanna, coming in studio. Let's get to it.
Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Great to be on.
So a bunch of stuff we want to talk to you about. First of all, on the student debt front, I found it very interesting. You've been leading the charge now, basically trying to prod Biden to take a maximalist approach. And I must say, I have been pleasantly surprised with how he's gone about this. I mean, obviously I would have preferred him totally wiping out the student loan debt, which I think he has the authority to do. He didn't, but his plan was still more than I expected from him. Then he appealed the cases. The Supreme Court striked it down. And, myself and many others were screaming, if the Supreme Court strikes it down, you better do the Higher Education Act of 1965 in order to, try a different avenue to reduce this student loan debt. And to my pleasant surprise, he did do that. Now, there's a couple like asterisks in the conversation, and he actually hasn't gone the full maximalist approach. Can you explain where he's fallen short and what your advice to him is on it?
Well, the biggest thing is we can't have people start repaying their loans come September, and we can't have the interest start accruing come September. So he said that he's going to invoke the Higher Education Act, but the loan payments resume, and he's not going to refer them to a credit agency. That's fine, but your interest is still piling up. And those of us who've had student loans, it looks like the number just keeps increasing, and that's going to continue to happen. And some people are going to pay it because some people may say, okay, I don't have to pay it. I'm not going to get referred, but other people are just going to get the bill and they're going to pay it. So I think at the very least, he should say no payments until this debt is forgiven.
Is there a more rapid approach that he could have taken as well? Because there was an analysis from, I think it was from David Dayen over the American Prospect, that basically, not to get too in the weeds with this, but the way they chose to do this was through the rulemaking process, which takes a long freaking time. And it's going to be probably years as this drags out and as they go through the process, and then it's going to go back through the court system before anybody sees a penny of debt relief. Was there a more rapid approach that they could have taken?
They could have done it through administrative order and not through the rulemaking process. One of the things they could have done in the HEROES Act is they could have just zeroed out after the president announced the forgiveness and not waited on the court. So then if the court came and struck it down, then it would be actually recovering money from students that was already canceled.
Oh.
And they could have been more assertive in canceling it because it's harder than to collect on something that's already been canceled. So, Obviously a Bernie Sanders would have approached this or an Elizabeth Warren differently.
Yeah.
They would have been more assertive. I agree with you that Biden has done more than we expected. But I think this is a key moment because he's got to fight. I keynoted the Young Democrats for America, and I said it's hard to be young in America in 2023. Look at student debt. And people, before I could even say cancel it, they started yelling, cancel it, cancel it. This is an issue that young people care deeply about. They want to see that we're fighting, and they don't want us to start repayments in September.
So this is an important point because even when I was reading about what happened with Biden invoking the Higher Education Act, every article I read on it seemed to indicate that, number one, yes, Biden can do this, but number two, there has to be sort of a comment period during the rulemaking process. So basically what you're describing for everybody is he actually didn't have to go about it this way. He could have used a different process, just sort of wiped the slate clean, and then basically said, hey, Supreme Court, if you want to hear a case on this and you want to say, bring back the student loan debt, okay, you go ahead and try to figure out how to do that administratively. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I mean, cancel it. You do it. Now the Supreme Court says, no, we shouldn't have canceled it. Now you have to figure out how do you collect back what you've already canceled. That's a much harder thing administratively to do. And so that could have been one avenue under the HEROES Act, certainly. Now, with the Higher Education Act, he could have gone through the administrative process instead of the rule process. But the biggest thing, I think, is this repayment. You can't have young people start to repay loans in September or see their interest start to accumulate when they haven't seen that for years.
So I do want to ask you, this might sound slightly conspiratorial, and this is actually not a theory I personally buy because, like I said, I think Biden has done more on this than I ever expected of him to do on this issue of student loan debt relief. But some people say, like, the reason he's going about it in this way is because he wants, like, the political brownie points of fighting and doing it. But now if the Supreme Court strikes it down again and says you can't do it through the Higher Education Act, then he's going to go, oh, okay, well, I tried every avenue. What do you want me to do? Do you buy that theory? Do you think that it's more for the political view of it, or does he actually want to get it done and he's just going about it a clunky way?
I think he wants to get it done because right now he's getting hit from both sides. The folks who don't like the student loan relief are upset that he's doing it. And then the students are upset that they're not getting the relief.
That's true, yeah.
So if you're going to do it, you want to get the actual relief. So I think at this point, he wants to do it. But there's this clouded judgment in the administration of some folks who somehow think that this is elitism to be providing loans and that it's against the working class. Let me just be clear. The people who are taking out the loans aren't rich kids. They're the working class kids, the middle class kids. I was son of middle class parents. I took out a lot of loans, over $150,000. I've done well. My kids probably aren't going to have to do it, right? I mean, so let's be clear about who's taking out these loans. And that's, I think, the problem with the rhetoric is it's somehow gotten painted as against the working class, where it's anything but that.
Let me just lay out the cynic's case on this a little more fully. I mean, part of why, I think the whole reason why Biden even was forced into canceling any debt was because pressure that was put on him through the Bernie campaign and the Elizabeth Warren campaign, where everybody else had their debt cancellation plans, and he felt like he had to say something on the campaign trail. Then once he's in office, he's sort of like, drags his feet. It's clear he has some ideological resistance to it, and some elements in his administration does. But because he's made this clear promise, he has to do something about it. And then lo and behold, now he chooses a process that's going to drag out beyond the next election. So if you're making the sort of cynical case here, it's like, okay, well, he wants to use it as a campaign issue and hold it over people's heads. But how committed is he to actually fighting this when you have the student loan debt, payments restarting, when you had other processes that you could have deployed in order to get this done more quickly, and when, by the way, you could have done a lot more than $10,000 or $20,000 in debt cancellation?
Well, look, he was late to the process. It's unfortunate some of the comments Speaker Pelosi made that Justice Roberts then cites in striking down the authority. Obviously, the administration was flat-footed for the first 6 months, and they could have been more aggressive. They could have, like I said, zeroed out the actual loans after they invoked it. But now I think that they do want this to be forgiven. Where the president could be more decisive is saying, stop the repayments, stop the interest accrual. partly because of the deal that was made in the debt deal. That requires the payments to be resumed, but that's under the HEROES Act. It doesn't say resume the payments under the Higher Education Act. I think the president feels like he made this commitment to the Republicans. The place that I think he could show the most leadership now is stopping the interest, stopping the repayment.
Yeah. So I will say, he's done a lot more on this than I ever thought he would do. So I do find the argument that, like, well, he doesn't really want it done a little conspiratorial and wrong, because if that was the case, I don't think he would have done the multiple appeals in the cases when he lost the cases. And I don't think he would have invoked the Higher Education Act. And I also think he realizes that his approval rating among young people was 60% when he announced this, and then it dropped all the way to 30% when like, the court decisions were coming in saying we're going to reverse this.
Yeah, which is
And
why
I don't care why he does it as long as he does it. As long as he does it.
I'm more inclined towards the conspiratorial view, because that's why they want to keep this going as an active issue through the next election, because it is really potent.
Yeah, but would you really appeal this many times, and would you really do the Higher Education Act if you didn't want to get it done? Like, at what point do we have to take things at face value? Like, take yes for an answer. He's trying to get it done. He's just going about it in a way which is true to his institutionalist roots. Now, I wish he wasn't as institutionalist as he was.
Yeah.
But clearly let's wait for the courts. We'll let the the interest start accruing. I think that's just because he's an institutionalist.
Let me ask you about the student debt repayments. I was looking at the numbers this morning. The average payment, just the average, is like $400 a month. I think it was $393 a month. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
We're at a time where we just got some decent economic news this week in terms of inflation is cooling. Wages have actually outpaced inflation for like the first time in decades. That's all good stuff. But at the same time, we have record-breaking amounts of personal debt that is held by Americans. You have almost $1 trillion in credit card debt. That also is a record. And now you're piling on top of that, people having to restart these payments. How much of an economic impact do you think that restarting of payments could have?
Well, it's a bad economics, especially in the face of Jerome Powell continually increasing interest rates, which I also think is a mistake. But the president doesn't have control over what Powell does. But you have Powell trying to slow the economy, and now you're going to tell people, young people, okay, don't spend this money on groceries, don't spend it on going out to eat, don't spend it on your daily needs, repay the loans. You're taking money out of the economy, and if you believe that there's any risk of a recession, this is only going to aggravate it. And so one of the things we don't know is what percent of people actually will repay their loans. But if that starts to be a significant number, then you're taking money out of the economy, and it could slow down the economy.
So we wanted to ask you about cluster bombs, because I know you're taking the lead on this issue. This is something that apparently President Biden said he struggled with making a decision as to whether or not to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. He's now making the argument we sort of ran out of other kinds of artillery, so we're leaning on the cluster bombs in like an interim period. Cluster bombs are, of course, banned by 123 countries. It's also illegal under U.S. law, not only international law, even though we didn't sign some of the international treaties on cluster bombs. You showed me a fact that has a 97% civilian death rate when it's been used previously.
That's at least what one study showed.
Yeah, so tell everybody what you're doing when it comes to cluster bombs.
Well, I am supporting Sarah Jacobs' amendment to ban them. I mean, here's what I don't understand. I was on earlier on Breaking Points. We've got almost $1 trillion defense budget. How is it that you can have that much of a defense budget and not have artillery?
Right.
I mean, we've had artillery for the last 100 years or something. This is not if you have a defense budget, you'd think the first thing you have is guns and bullets.
Of course. Yeah.
And we don't have bullets. I believe the president is frustrated, but the frustration should be, the first question we should be asking is, why don't we have enough conventional artillery when we're giving defense contractors almost $1 trillion, over 50% of the budget?
Where's this money going? Where's it going, to your point?
It's going into massive defense contracts. It's going into overseas bases that are for the Cold War. It's going into legacy industries that are not actually relevant to the modern security needs. I mean, you would think it doesn't take someone with a military background to think, have enough bullets if you want to prepare for a war. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that having cluster bombs go there is going to hurt not just potentially Russians, but Ukrainian lives. I mean, when the battlefield, unfortunately, is in Ukraine, and if you have these cluster bombs, a lot of them detonate after the fact, years after the fact. We know they could hurt civilians. We know that they often kill kids. We know that when they explode, they're not targeted because they have massive other explosions, and this is going to mean more people losing their life. So what I would say is, why aren't we? We're a year into this. If you want, come to Congress to say fund more artillery, or go to partners to say we need more artillery. You would probably get that in Congress. Why are you coming a year into it with this idea of cluster bombs?
Yeah, and I mean, just to spell it out a little bit more for people, I mean, Russia has used cluster bombs in this war, which is horrific. The reason why so many nations have signed on to these international treaties banning their use, and the reason why even the UK, which has been very hawkish in the Ukrainian conflict, why they've said we think that this is a mistake, is because it scatters all of these mini grenades around, and some percentage of them don't detonate right away because they have to impact a hard surface and whatever. If they hit softer ground, mud, etc., they don't necessarily detonate. And then frequently you have children who find them, pick them up, hands get blown off, get killed in a lot of instances. So that's why they're so atrocious. I mean, what does this do in terms of our moral standing vis-a-vis this war?
Well, look, I still think that Ukraine has the moral high ground for one simple reason, that Russia invaded them. I mean, this is Ukraine's territory. But what it does is it gives Russia and others a talking point to try to draw false moral equivalence, saying, well, this is just a territorial dispute, as Russia puts it. I disagree with that, but it gives them sort of propaganda points. Now you say, well, why does that matter? The propaganda is not going to matter in the United States. No, it's not going to matter in most of Europe. No, but there's a rest of the world. There's Africa, there's Asia, there's India, there's China, and we know that the opinion there hasn't been as clear cut as it's been in the West. So why are we giving Russia a talking point which allows other countries to say, okay, we're going to keep purchasing from Russia. We don't have a stake in being on Ukraine's side. I think that's where the problem is. And the other thing I'm not convinced yet is how much this is actually going to be decisive on a counteroffensive. They're still going to be under an artillery disadvantage.
I think what disturbs me about it is this like mission creep and slow motion escalation when it comes to, weapons that previously the Biden administration draws a red line and says, we're not going to give them that kind of weapon. Remember?
Right.
Can you give me?
Yeah,
F-16. There was a few examples of this. Like, we're not doing that because that would be an escalation. And of course, the fear is, like, what comes after cluster bombs? They're like, well, maybe a little tactical nuke here or there. It's a scary proposition, especially when you have, the U.S. and Russia were both nuclear powers, and it's like slowly escalating towards some inevitable conclusion, which is too dangerous and crazy for any of us to wrap our minds around. Does that worry you too? And, I agree with your assessment that, like, Ukraine was illegally and offensively invaded by a country that they didn't attack. Like, end of conversation. I get that. But do we need to get to the negotiation table? Because I feel like, hindsight is 20/20, and in the future we could be looking back going, wow, that was a mistake that we didn't try to sit down and work this out at a more reasonable time. So do you agree we should be negotiating and trying to get to a better end?
Well, I've stood by the progressive letter, which basically said have lines of communication. I voted for every single aid package to Ukraine. I will still vote for the aid package to Ukraine come September, even though I disagree and don't like the cluster bomb decision, because I don't want Ukraine to be without aid, and then you're basically having Russia march in, even potentially to Kiev. I mean, we have to support them until the war ends. But at the same time, engage with the dialogue, engage with countries like India to have dialogue, to try to have a just peace and figure out what that looks like while supporting Ukraine. I don't think the two are at odds, yet when we put out that letter basically saying, let's have conversation and let's look for what the end will be for a just peace while supporting Ukraine, you would have thought that we had broken every rule on the Capitol.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was crazy that so many people ran away from it. Credit to you for standing firm on that, because I thought that letter was common sense.
The letter was very carefully worded, I thought, and made it clear that you thought the Ukrainian cause was just. And what's been disturbing to me is that since that, letter came out and there's this whole freak out and everybody except for you basically walks away from it, we've heard very little critique from the elected left of the idea of just a blank check and endless war. I mean, really, the pushback on cluster munitions is kind of the first that I've heard in quite a while, yourself accepting. And it leaves open the narrative to portions of the right, many of whose critique isn't really anti-war, it's not really anti-intervention. It's like, we don't like this conflict, we want to be in China, or we want to be invading Mexico instead. And so it gives this false impression that there's more anti-war sentiment on the right when those voices, I feel like, have been very effectively silenced among the elected left.
Well, I do agree with you that the cluster bombs is the first time since that letter that people in the House are saying no. I think it'll be important to watch the vote on it. Jim McGovern, I give him credit. He went to the House floor. He said, we need a vote on this amendment. We're going to get a vote on the amendment. And I think this is going to be a big test for, I hope we're going to get more Democratic votes to stop cluster bombs than Republican votes. But this is a key moment where we can start to draw some lines, as Kyle put it as well, that we can't just have escalation. And to some extent, I give the president credit because he came after a campaign against endless war, where he heard Bernie say that, where he had Warren say that, where he himself took that position in Afghanistan. He comes out, he pulls out of Afghanistan. Senator Sanders and I defend him. He took a lot of heat for that.
Yeah.
And you had Petraeus on CNN for 2 weeks, killing his poll numbers. I mean, that was a courageous decision. And then on this, in the beginning, remember, he got a lot of heat from people saying, take the war to Russia, respond to Putin, go into no-fly zone, give them offensive weapons. And he resisted. And he has actually, and for 16 months, he hasn't given them cluster bombs. So I think his judgment it's not just President Biden. He's informed by a greater skepticism to intervention and endless wars. But we need to guard against the creep. We need to make sure we draw the line here at these cluster bombs.
Well, I hope you're the one that's whispering in his ear the entire time, because if he has you as an influence, then he'll be even less interventionist on that front. Did you want to jump in?
I just want to ask one more question on this piece with Ukraine, which is, specifically, how do you help to bring about negotiations? How do you help to precipitate the end of this conflict? And what is your view, and I know you get briefings on this, of how the war is going for Ukraine? Because frankly, we cover it really extensively at Breaking Points. We try to read everything that we can. It's just anytime in war, it's very difficult to get a sense of what's really going on. I feel like that is even more the case with this particular situation. There's all kinds of reporting that our own intelligence agencies don't really know what the Ukrainians are up to. Don't keep them privy to that. Some of the sabotage and drone strikes on the Kremlin, et cetera, we were in the dark about, and we tell them, please don't do that again, but they keep going. Anyway, that's just all to say there's a lot of fog around what is actually happening. So, number one, what would you advise the president in terms of how do we get to a negotiated solution? Number two, how is the counteroffensive going? What is your sense of how things actually are on the ground with the war right now?
Well, just from public reports, I'd say Ukraine has obviously exceeded anyone's expectation with their bravery and their fighting and what they managed to do. But they are at an artillery disadvantage. And it was almost at 6-1, whether now it's maybe 3-1. That's the reason for the cluster munitions decision. If the war was going, if the counteroffensive was going swimmingly well, we wouldn't need to do this. So it's a long, hard fight. And the challenge is it's unclear that this is going to tip it in Ukraine's favor. And then you get to the end of the year, you're in this long, hard fight that's basically been a status quo. How does this resolve in a just way? I guess one thing I would do if I were the president, other than keeping channels of dialogue open, is getting other countries that may be mediating in influence, that have relationships in the region, to be involved. I mean, France tried, Macron tried, India's tried. I mean, it may be that it's too much for the United States to be dictating it, but we could get our allies to resolve. The challenge is in Ukraine. Understandably, they want to fight to the death. I mean, they're what I understand from people who are politically involved in the situation is the Ukrainian people want to defend their land, and so Zelensky has to be responsive to his people.
Yeah. I mean, I can't blame Zelensky for being responsive to his people, but the fact that we back Ukraine and we see their causes just doesn't mean that our interests are 100% aligned with them. We have to look out.
Yeah, and for example, let's say hypothetically you get to a point where Russians are totally kicked out of the Donbass, right? Well, according to Zelensky, he says we're going to take back Crimea too. And it's like, well, what if that's another 5-year-long war with 100,000 more deaths? It's like, as bad as it is, wouldn't you want to? They've held it since what, 2012?
I mean,
So wouldn't you want to negotiate on that front, right?
Of nuclear escalation that hangs over all
yes,
of this.
that's the terrifying
the
thing.
Stakes
That's why we need a line of communication. I like your idea of getting people, maybe Erdogan or somebody like that who can mediate and try to work this stuff out. Lula is phenomenal at this stuff. He's very pragmatic with foreign policy. He had a good relationship even with George W. Bush and many people who we think are terrible. He knew how to work it behind the scenes. And that sounded vaguely sexual.
Yeah, and he had a good meeting with Biden
right.
when he came here. So I think the point is also you have massive casualties of the Ukrainians and Russians. I mean, and it's people who are dying.
That's right. Yeah,
and there's you can have an aggressive assertion of Ukraine is just, we're going to support Ukraine. We've got to look for how we have a just peace. The problem is when you say the third sentence in D.C., the Beltway says, well, you must not believe in the first two.
You're pro-Russian.
You must be pro-Putin.
Ridiculous.
And, even Kennedy at the height of the Cold War in his American University speech said, we've got to explore peace. We've got to explore dialogue. And that was at a much more heightened time of tension with the Soviets. So it's unfortunate that strain of thinking is so suppressed in being and manipulated. I'm sure people will pull this clip, take something I've said, and call me a Russian asset on Twitter when I've clearly voted for all the Ukrainian aid. I've supported Ukraine. I've said Ukraine's cause is just.
And you'll get hit from the opposite side too, by the way, on social media, where they'll say you're a Ukrainian Nazi or something like that.
Yeah, that I'm used to. The left. One of my favorite episodes was this person from the left was attacking me. Finally, one of the more corporate Democrats jumps in, and the person says, "No, only the left can attack Khanna." So I was like, all right, at least I got bad.
So I wanted to ask you, we just spent a bunch of time talking about foreign policy. Apparently, I just saw a thread on Twitter today. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is refusing to go to Isaac Herzog's address to Congress. That's, of course, the president of Israel. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I respectfully disagree on that. I mean, look, I met President Herzog when I was there with Barbara Lee and Speaker Pelosi. He's more on the left in terms of his political ideology. He's more in the Shimon Peres tradition. He's not from the extreme Netanyahu party. Now, my view is no new settlements, lift the embargo on Gaza, have more enforcement so settlers aren't doing damage in villages. And I've been clear on a two-state solution. But I think you get that through engagement of the more progressive elements. And I don't think you boycott the president of Israel.
Is that his view, though, too? Is his view to totally stop the settlements? Are they moving in that direction in any way, shape, or form?
I doubt he would take that view. I don't know what his view is on
which is why, I kind of understand where Ilhan Omar is coming from, because if that's the left in Israel, it's like, I don't want to play along with the charade. Like,
this is the most right-wing government in Israeli history. I mean, you have, cabinet officials who out and out called for a Palestinian town to be wiped off the map. You have increase in, you just had a horrific violent raid. You have settlements. I would like to know, do you think that we should be withholding military aid to try to compel fewer human rights abuses at the least? Do you really think a two-state solution is feasible and possible at this point? Because that's part of with this Netanyahu government, which is in coalition with some truly extreme fringe factions. It's almost like they don't even pretend anymore that a two-state solution is a goal. And as the settlements encroach further and further, it just becomes impossible to see how that could ever be a realistic outcome.
Well, I think with Netanyahu, it's highly, highly improbable. Before that, with Bennett, who was also more right, and Lapid, at least there was still some. I mean, there were Arabs in the cabinet. There was some hope that there would be two states, but you need to see a new. For there to be two states, you have to have partners on both sides. But I still think that has to be the aspiration. I mean, the settlements in many of the places are illegal under international law, and those settlements will have to be part of a negotiated process to have two states. I don't think it's impossible to get there. I would say on the aid, I voted candidly for the aid, but what I have said is that under the Leahy law, aid cannot be used for human rights violations, and that the State Department should track that for all countries.
Yeah, they're not listening. They're not listening to that.
and that our aid is already restricted under the Leahy law, and I support those restrictions. It shouldn't be used for anything that's a violation of human rights.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just wrap this portion up by saying I understand where Ilhan is coming from. It reminds me of if George W. Bush went somewhere to give a speech during the height of the Iraq War, and somebody was like, I'm not going to go to that. This guy's a war criminal. I totally understand that perspective when it comes to the Israeli government, because they're some of the most brazen with their human rights abuses, with their apartheid system. And, they also have Rashida Tlaib also can't go visit her grandma because of how restrictive this government is. And
Ilhan
she cited that.
I think, banned completely from the country.
Which I've spoken out against.
Freedom and democracy, but you can't come here because you criticize us. It's laughable.
I've spoken. The two things I will say. One is that, and I think I was on CNN years ago when this happened, saying any American citizen should be, especially a member of Congress, should be able to go to Israel and defend their right to do so. But the other thing is, you can have a passionate disagreement with Congresswoman Tlaib or Congresswoman Omar, but some of the attacks that they have faced for voicing what they view as their public policy perspective are targeting them because of their faith, targeting them because they're women of color,
and smearing them as anti-Semites, which is a big one I've seen.
And that I think is unfortunate, and it's not going to get a stronger U.S.-Israel relationship, or it's not going to endear young progressives. I've said the challenge is, how do you have a two-state solution recognizing Israel as an ally in Palestinian rights? And people maybe to the left or the right, but certainly we've got to stop smearing folks who you disagree with, beat them on the arguments, to argue the merits with them.
Yeah, and the thing she was called an anti-Semite for was saying that, talking about AIPAC, the Israel lobby, saying it's all about the Benjamins, a thing she would say about the Saudi Arabian lobby too, but nobody would call her an Islamophobe if she pointed that out. So anyway, that's one of the things that triggers me.
And I don't agree with her comments. I just don't.
I agree. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about is, what is your view of the left movement at this point? And, and I get into asking you more about Biden and your support of him, et cetera. But, it feels like post Bernie, there's been a lot of disillusion at the national level in terms of like any sort of cohesive left movement. There's very little. I think you're one of the few that almost consistently voices any sort of dissent from the Biden administration, when the idea was, okay, we're going to elect the squad. We're going to get these people in there. They're going to fight against Democratic leadership. They're going to make it clear there's a contrast between them and, the Pelosi corporate wing of the party. So what's happening with that project?
Well, I would say the left has been stronger than ever in my lifetime. And I'll say a couple points. We just had a progressive caucus meeting. Bernie Sanders came. He said when he started the progressive caucus, there were 5 members. You got about 100 members there. And all of them almost have signed on to Medicare for all, to a commitment on free college. Now, you could say we haven't achieved it, but we're shifting where the median of the Democratic Party is. And
where's the fight, though? I don't see the fight. On paper, they're for it, but nobody's fighting for it.
And let me say, I think shifting the median of where the Democratic voter is, yes, but I mean, healthcare isn't an active topic. Biden
wouldn't even do public option.
He doesn't even talk about the public option anymore. Yeah. I don't hear anyone saying anything about it.
Well, I agree on healthcare. we haven't done it enough. I mean, the best thing we did on healthcare was the insulin caps, but that was for people on Medicare. We increased some of the affordable care subsidies, but I mean, I think he should have started to expand Medicare to 60 to 55 during the pandemic. He could have done that. He ran on that to expand it to at least 60. We should have done more on prescription drugs. We could have eliminated medical debt in cases where hospitals are engaged in price gouging. So I agree with you on healthcare. We haven't done enough. But I think you would agree that President Biden has been a much, much, much more progressive president than Senator Joe Biden, and probably on many dimensions the most progressive in modern times. I mean, the child tax credit, the fact that we got a bigger rescue plan, that we didn't have the same debates, the fact that we're now saying we got to build manufacturing here, not just offshoring jobs, that we're focused on the working class, talking about unions positively. So the point is, I think My view is post-Biden, there should be 20 years of progressives running the Democratic Party like there were DLC candidates. But we've got to build to that, and we're not going to get there. I think the left, I'm all for criticism. I come on these shows. I know I'm going to disagree with Kyle on some things on Israel. I'm going to disagree.
We appreciate that, by the way.
And I think that's healthy. I don't think you should have sort of a left ecosystem of the media, which is just lionizing the left. On the other hand, there is so much cannibalization of us attacking each other. I was like, let's just get some power first. I mean, let's just get someone, there's got to be some building. And we're much closer than people realize.
So can I just say, here's where the frustration comes from. I agree with you that Biden's the most progressive president of my lifetime. I agree. But that's also like being the tallest kid in kindergarten. and we elected these left leaders so that they could do what the Tea Party did back in the day to Republicans, which is like, I'm going to make your life living hell, and I'm going to force you to accept my ideology, my ideas, which, by the way, is backed up. The American people want these things too, based on the polling, right? And so one of the things that's evidence of, and why many people are frustrated, is that, so in the race right now, you have Cornel West, who's running third-party approach. Now, I have criticism of third-party approach. I think you need to get rid of first-past-the-post voting and do ranked choice voting in order to make that viable. But Cornel West is running, who's a historic lefty intellectual. And then you also, in the Democratic primary, have Marianne Williamson running, who's, it's not debatable, her philosophy and ideology and policies are more in line with Bernie Sanders than Joe Biden's are. And so just one of the things she's running on is reviving FDR's Economic Bill of Rights, which is all I've wanted from any candidate in my entire life. We have the right to a job that pays a living wage, the right to a voice in the workplace through a union. Right off the bat, this is better than Joe Biden. Right to quality universal health care, Medicare for all, better than Joe Biden. Right to a cost-free higher education, better than Joe Biden. Right to affordable good housing, better than Joe Biden. And I could go on here pointing out the areas where Marianne's philosophy agrees more with yours than Joe Biden's does. And I think the frustration is, once people get in that house, once people get in the club, it's like, okay, we're going to close the ranks and we're going to basically play defense for our leader, Joe Biden. And look, I've taken heat for being too pro-Joe Biden when I give him credit on doing things that are good, like pulling out of Afghanistan, right? But you need to see more of that fight from the left-wing Congress people, because we need to know somebody's representing us and our views. I mean, I haven't heard the word Medicare for all said by anybody in Congress in, a year now? So your thoughts?
Well, we're still talking about Medicare for all. I mean, maybe the question is, how do we get more progress than just talking about it in floor speeches and tweets? But there are places where we fought the administration on student loans. I mean, that was a place. We fought on climate. I mean, the IRA, the fact that they had so many climate investments was because progressives said that's the one place that's non-negotiable. And with the American Rescue Plan, the progressives had a lot of our priorities in that plan. But look, I'm one of the few people, I've said nice things about Marianne Williamson, and I've gone on her podcast. I've said that she should be welcomed into having ideas, and if she moves the platform to be more progressive, consistent with voters, good for her. And I never criticize her. People say, well, why aren't you endorsing her? Because I think there's more that goes into being an effective president of the United States than just having a more sympathetic ideological alignment on Medicare for all. I mean, I think it does matter if you've had elective office. It doesn't have to be a lot of elective office, but some elective office. I do think it matters.
But his experience is bad. Come on. He voted for the Iraq War. He voted for NAFTA. He did the crime bill. His experience is actually bad. I would do a strike against him because, like you said, he was way more conservative as a senator than he is progressive as a president. He's a better president than a senator.
They also, Congressman, could have said those things about you when you were challenging
incumbent
Democrat or AOC when she was challenging Joe Crowley.
I wasn't running for
but there was
president
a benefit to you, and there was a benefit to our country. The fact that you and AOC
were an outsider. You were an outsider.
We're outsiders and had a different perspective.
And I think there's a benefit to having outsiders eventually in leadership and running for president. But I don't think that means no. I mean, if Nina Turner had won, for example, her House seat and run, I think that would have been different. But that said, look, Marianne Williamson is adding to the debate. I think the attacks on her have been unkind, and she shouldn't be silenced. I mean, if she can move the platform in progressive directions, good for her.
I guess the part for me, because this is partly relevant, because AOC just endorsed, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez just endorsed Biden this week. Bernie endorsed him early on. You've endorsed him as well. It's like, we're not naive.
I know how the game works.
I get that you need to work with the president. right? I get that you feel like, and we could debate this, but you feel like keeping a decent relationship with him will enable you to be able to maneuver, to be able to get more progressive priorities into bills. Like, I understand all of that. I just don't know why any of you had to endorse anyone. Like, why not just...
Yeah, if you stayed out, I would have respected that a lot, because that's a wink and a nod to the left. Like, do your thing. Let's see how far this goes.
I mean, you would actually, if you did that, you would be much more in line with the Democratic base, not the left-wing, weird online, whatever. Overwhelming majority of Democrats are like, we actually want options. We actually want a primary. We're actually concerned about the president for a variety of reasons running for office again. So why insert yourself? Why not just stay out, let the process play out, and maybe call for debates, because that would be good for democracy and consistent with a lot of Democratic Party rhetoric about how pro-democracy we are. So why the need to actually actively jump in for a man that you have a lot of ideological differences with and have been courageous in criticizing at times?
Well, I think the president's first 2 years were more progressive than many of us expected. I mean, people were genuinely proud of the American Rescue Plan. They were genuinely proud of what he did on Afghanistan, what he did on student loans, what he's done on the IRA, what he's doing.
What is he even planning for the second term? I mean, legitimately.
That's a good point, yeah.
Because the first 2 years, agreed.
Yeah, I do. I 100% agree with you.
We don't hear much about, lately what we've gotten is we're going to side with Capitol over workers on a rail strike. We're going to agree to this like ridiculous hostage taking from the Republicans and strike a bad deal with them. I mean, that's basically since Ron Klain has left.
That's right.
There's been a turn in the administration, and they have not laid out an affirmative vision for a second term that I've heard of. Maybe you can inform me about it. I hear a lot of cheerleading the accomplishments that happened. There's some things to celebrate there, no doubt. I hear a lot of just, we're not Trump, and that also is legitimate, let's keep the baddies away from the White House. I get that too. But what are we even supporting for a second term?
Well, I think we should lay that out. I mean, we need to get the living wage. I mean, a wage increase. That was one of the big misses. We didn't get the minimum wage. We should have fired the parliamentarians. Some of us called on to do that. We should have childcare for everyone. I'm working on $10 a day childcare, but you want to go after people's costs, do childcare. Have an agenda to have paid family leave, which we still don't have in this country.
Yeah.
I've said, why can't we bring modern steel plants to places that have been deindustrialized? If Europe's doing that with clean steel, with hydrogen steel, why aren't we doing that in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and Ohio? There's a lot we can do and achieve. And some of it actually with Republican votes. I mean, force them to vote on, are you for paid family leave? Are you for raising the wage? Are you for bringing steel plants into the Midwest? I mean, so I would run on an economic populist agenda and on abortion, obviously reproductive rights and gay rights and democracy. The articulation of that, I think the articulation of the working class economic agenda for a second term has to be stronger. I think the president's done a very good job highlighting the stakes with abortion rights, which are existential for people. He's done a good job on highlighting gun safety. He's done a good job on highlighting the extremism of democracy, but he's going to have a strong economic message as well.
The funny thing is, I agree totally with the agenda that you just laid out. I think fighting for those things that you just said is an ideal path for the next 4 years. But funny enough, that's why I support Marianne Williamson and not Biden, is because I feel like she's more likely to fight on those issues. Krystal, I'll give you the last question.
Yeah. So I would love to get just your big picture view of, what are you hopeful about? What do you see happening in the country right now that you find encouraging? What is the plan for being able to push Biden, if he's your guy, in, a more progressive direction that he seems to have backed away from in this last number of months? What is your view of those things?
I'm very hopeful for the younger generations. They get it on student loans. They get it on wages. They get it on climate. They get it on cost of college. They get it on childcare. And I think that's the future of the party. I say, you want to see the future of this country, don't worry about Trump versus Biden. Come meet my colleagues who've been elected in the last few years. Meet Maxwell Frost, Delia Ramirez, Jonathan Jackson, not just AOC and Jamal Bowman, who are wonderfully, out there and well-known, just people who are not as well-known, Chris Deluzio. And you'll get a sense of where this party is headed, where this country is headed. And I would just say to progressives two things. Don't forget how close Bernie Sanders came to being president of the United States. He won Iowa, he won New Hampshire, he won Nevada. And had he done a little better in South Carolina and had everyone not dropped, he would have been the nominee. And I think there's sort of an amnesia. People want the progressives to forget how much of a base we have. So keep fighting. Let's make this president as successful as we can. And then from 28 to 48, let's have 20 years of a progressive movement. This country is only going to go if we keep fighting. We're only making more and more gains. And sometimes that's what I find. There's so much doomerism or negativity on the left that I say you don't realize how close you are. Nelson Mandela used to say it always seems impossible until it's done, and people often stop short of victory right before they're about to achieve it. And sometimes I feel that about progressives. Like, I get you're not there yet, but you've gotten the most progressive president in your lifetime, and if you can just keep pushing, maybe we can have this progressive movement post-Biden.
Yeah, well, except for the post-Biden part, I'd say that's exactly why we're supporting Marianne Williamson. So,
thank you for being a good sport.
Congressman, we really appreciate you coming.
Thank you. I enjoy
that we genuinely.
No, I enjoy it. I appreciate the back and forth, and I appreciate because the accountability and forcing to think through the issues, and it's a way to talk to people on the left. I go on your show, I go on Bree sometimes, et cetera, and you look at sometimes the comments, they're all negative, and then I'll be at the airport, I'll talk to someone. By the way, a lot of people listen to you guys and listen to folks, and they'll say, thank you for being on there. And I wish more members of Congress would realize, like, what they remember at the end of the day often is, okay, you're willing to engage.
Yeah.
And you're transparent. Like, I don't go and say something to you that I won't go say on Fox News. And I think those two things are what's going to build trust with the progressive movement.
Totally. And I would love for you to encourage any of your colleagues to come on with us. We'll ask tough questions. It's our job, but we also, I hope you feel like, are fair.
And good luck moving forward on the cluster bomb issue.
Keep us updated there.
We're 100% with you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Great
Thank
to see
you,
Congressman. Thank
Good.
you.
All right. So there you have it. That was Congressman Khanna. Good discussion. The point that you were making that I jumped in on as well, which is like, I get it. Like, I get the way politics works. I'm not an idiot. Human relationships are human relationships, and you have to keep a line of communication, and you want to influence the president, and you want him to take you seriously. Like, I understand all of that.
Yeah.
So it is a complicated picture, but if they just stayed out, like, that would have been the wink and the nod to the left, like, yeah, I'm kind of with Marianne. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But they refuse to even do that. And I think the thing that annoys me is it's like backing Biden. I don't think anything positive actually comes of it. Like, I don't think he's more willing to listen to the left because of that.
No.
So I think if a Congress...
He's actually less willing to listen to the left.
Yeah, I think if Congressman Khanna...
Yeah, you put no pressure. You didn't require anything for your endorsement.
I think if Congressman Khanna kept a good relationship with the president, and, I don't know if he talks to him on the phone or meets with him once a month or whatever. I don't know how often he sees him, but he could keep doing that. And if he never endorsed Biden, he could still keep doing that.
Right.
And then look, come the general election, if it is Biden, I have no problem with him, of course, saying I support Joe Biden over Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just, and they can make a point of it. Like, I have a policy of not endorsing anybody. You know what I mean? Like, there's a million ways you could have navigated this that wasn't just immediately bending the knee.
Yes, I fully agree with that. I mean, I always want to say, like, I genuinely appreciate that Ro Khanna comes in. I think the fact
he's the only one.
And I think the fact that he does that I don't think it's an accident that he ends up being one of the better members of Congress and one of the more courageous, because he engages in these spaces. He's willing to do it, et cetera. But the other piece for me is, like, he brought up, we've got 100 co-sponsors on the Medicare for All bill. It's like, that doesn't fucking matter. If you don't have a plan to push it, then okay, you've got 100 people who are willing to virtue signal on an incredibly popular issue. It does not matter. So that's the piece to me, is like, I don't see what the strategy is to actually get more of a progressive agenda, and certainly, immediately endorsing Biden, not even letting him twist in the wind a little bit and wonder about it, gives you zero leverage to push for anything for second agenda. Biden doesn't plan on running on anything, and no one apparently, at least at the elected level, is really going to push him to do that. So it's like, yeah, you can land, okay, here's what he should run on, but what are you going to do to try to make that a reality? And, That's the piece that to me I just can't quite wrap
Yeah,
my
I mean,
head around.
there is no strategy, and they don't really care all that much because having a strategy and fighting, that all requires work and a vision. And I think they lack both a vision and doing the hard work. So, like, a good example that I've seen people bring up, and he brought it up to his credit, like paid family leave. This is something that polls at over 80%. Even a majority of Republican voters support this.
Right.
Why would you not do a standalone bill and then hit the Sunday shows and go fight for it and have the president give a speech and, list out the numbers? 84% of the country wants this, and a majority of Republicans want this, and 90-something% of Democrats want this, and we're going to get it done. And if you vote against this, Republicans, you need to look a hardworking mother in the eye and tell her you can't pick your kid up from school. You can't do X, Y. Like, let's see some fight. Let's see some political pressure. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, okay. Well, the battle lines are clear. Everybody knows who was on the right side, who was fighting for the right thing. And to your point, especially after Ron Klain left the Biden White House, like, he hadn't done Dickie McGee's acts.
What he has
right?
done has sucked.
Well,
I
actually,
mean, the debt,
to be fair, I didn't expect him to invoke the Higher Education Act at all. So that I'll give him credit for.
Okay, yeah.
But outside of that, yeah, it's nothing. Jeff Zients is a total corporate hack, and Biden is more conservative than he was under Ron Klain.
We very quickly forgotten the way that he gave in to the Republican hostage-taking tactics on the debt ceiling. And that's the reason why the student loan payments are restarting, is because he made that deal as part of
That's a great point. I forgot about that.
The debt ceiling negotiations. And so, I mean, listen, I've sort of stopped getting my hopes up about some of these things. And I do want to give it it is better that Ro Khanna and others are there to push on cluster munitions, for example. I hope that's the start of them being more aggressive and challenging some of the unending escalation in the Ukraine war. Beyond that, I wish there was more fight there. I wish there was more willing to draw a distinction with leadership. I don't understand why they needed to endorse right away in the primary. I don't know why they couldn't stay out. I would love to see them advocating for, hey, listen, make your case to the American people. Go get on a debate stage. Because we saw the whole reason we got student loan debt relief at all is because Biden had to get on a debate stage up against Bernie Sanders and had to say something on student debt. Otherwise, that doesn't happen. So there's a lot of value that can come through a primary. There's a lot of pressure that can be applied, even if Biden ends up being the nominee.
Yeah, I mean, so I've said repeatedly, I think Biden is sort of by far the best president of my lifetime. He's way better than I expected him to be, just judging it objectively based on the things that he's done. To your point, it was much more early on.
Yeah.
But I wonder if, what are the chances that all of these congressional progressives who have bent the knee to Biden, do they just think he's even better than he is? Is that what it is? Do they view him as no, seriously, guys? Is it my view, but on steroids? Where it's I think he's the best president of my lifetime, but he's still just the tallest kid in kindergarten. There's nothing to write home about. I mean, Lyndon Johnson blows him out of the water, and he was a hardcore racist. FDR blows him out of the water. He did Japanese internment, and he was still way better, right? So, I guess I'm trying to steel man their case, and the best I can come up with is that they genuinely view him as no, he's a very progressive president, and I agree with him. You know what I mean? Is that possible?
Here's I think the way that they would say it. I mean, I do think they view him as better than we do. AOC, in explaining why she was endorsing Biden, she said he was, quote, quite good.
Yeah, the American Rescue Plan she pointed to. And what else did she pointed to a couple things.
I don't remember. But that was the language of he's quite good stuck in my head. I think they would say, listen, we've seen that there are things we can get out of this administration. It's better than we expected. We don't think that Marianne is going to win. So we think we get more out of maintaining a good relationship with the guy who's in charge and being able to be part of those negotiations. And we think that is the best way to achieve progressive priorities. I think that's what they would argue. I mean, that's basically what Roe does argue.
Yeah, that would be a more honest, I think, assessment. The idea of keeping the line of communication open. Again, my hesitancy on that point is just never worked that way. It never worked.
You would be,
if you're a crusading psychopath, it works better.
To me, it's really clear. Yes, if you're a crusading psychopath, it works better. But even just just in the context of a primary, if you don't force this guy to have to run on anything or answer
what do you expect you're going to get?
Yeah,
right.
We know what we're going to get. Nothing. He's already running on nothing.
Yeah.
We know the nothing that we will get. And primaries are really maybe the most powerful place to actually extract some promises and demand some sort of affirmative agenda that then when he's in office, with the student loan debt, we see while it's limited, I'm not saying like it's going to be everything that you want, you can at least apply some pressure to make good on the promises that were extracted during the primary.
Yeah, yeah. And just to be clear, because I don't want people getting lost in the weeds and interpreting the wrong thing, none of this is to say that Trump and Biden are equal or DeSantis and Biden are equal. In my opinion, Biden has been a million times better than any Republican. So I just want to make that clear because sometimes there's like what you say and what you mean and then how it's misinterpreted many times. And I don't want people to get the misimpression that this detailed talk about strategy and the way forward and all this stuff is a way to like obscure the fact that this dude who can barely complete a full sentence is a million times better than Donald Trump. Anyway,
yes,
that's all I got for you.
Indeed. Well, thank you to Congressman Khanna for spending time with us. We're really grateful for him being willing to subject himself to, what is, we always have to challenge him a little bit on some of these things. And thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to those of you who have subscribed. If you are not a paid subscriber, we would greatly appreciate it. As Kyle always says, we do not take a dime for advertisers. We really try to keep it as pure as possible over here. So if you can, please go on over to the Substack and subscribe. Otherwise, we'll see y'all next week.